and welcome to our 5 minutes with Ekaterina tips and tricks for learning a language. We have already looked at the numbers together and we were figuring out how many words we need to learn in order to master a foreign language. And today I decided to go to the numbers one more time and show or figure out how many words totally the certain language has and how many words the native speakers use in their everyday life situations, and actually how many words the educated native speakers would know. That's a very interesting question. You wouldn't believe how difficult this question is because of the counting problems. You can't really place a person on the chair and ask just to name all the words from the memory. It is impossible. And by the way, it's something that also makes learning the list of vocabulary not that effective in the language learning, for my opinion. But again, going back to the situations with native speakers, it is very difficult to solve this problem. So in order to do it, I just went online and I want to share this information with you because as for me it's very exciting. First of all, let's figure out how many words are there in the certain language. And you probably would imagine that it is different for the different languages, and it is very hard to calculate because the language is changing structure, and the language we are using now is not the same language that our grandparents used, and it is definitely different language from those which can be met in the beginning of the 20th century. And we have some certain social activities, some inventions that didn't exist, and that means that we are acquiring more vocabulary, we are making up new words from the one point, and from the other point there are some vocabulary that we don't really need anymore, and it just slowly disappears from the language. So the question is, should we count the old vocabulary, should we count the scientific vocabulary, should we count professional vocabulary, should we count the words that the language borrows from other languages? And all this methodology, it makes the estimation very difficult. And in news stories for two languages, I was comparing Ukrainian, English and Russian. I was doing small research on these three languages, and when I did it, I was very surprised that both Ukrainian linguists and English linguists said that respectively in these two languages there should be approximately 1 million words. The problem is that they cannot prove it, and the Russian linguists from their town, they were laughing and saying, who knows? You know, they don't believe the estimations, particularly towards English colleagues. Despite the English colleagues, the linguistic department that is developing these problems is bigger actually for English language than for Russian language because of some founding of the science. But it doesn't matter, so independently linguists of two countries said that one language should have approximately 1 million words. Can you imagine? That's a huge number, but there is no way to prove it. That leads us to the next point where we need to find some kind of proofs, and that is the place when we are starting to look at something written, and something written with most of vocabulary concentrated in one place without repetition, which is easy to count, are the dictionaries. And we should look first of all at the dictionaries of the explaining dictionaries monolingual, because they are usually bigger. And here it's again very interesting which words are there in this dictionary, because some dictionaries they include some abbreviations, some dictionaries they include even kind of numbers, formulas, and if we should consider them as the separate words, it's quite discussional. But in order to tell you about the numbers, I made some notes and I'm going to use them right now. So let's start with the dictionary of Ukrainian language. And we have in Ukrainian language, we have two relatively new dictionaries. The first was published in 2016, and the second, for some reason, it was published next year in 2017. I don't know why the gap is so small and the difference is so big. Because the first dictionary, it has 165,000 words, and the second one, it has 300,000 words. We have kind of legal proof that the Ukrainian language has at least 300,000 words. That's the starting point for the Ukrainian language, but again, some Ukrainian linguists believe that there should be as many as 1 million, and they're saying that this dictionary is the dictionary of the literature language, and Ukrainian language is very dialectic, it's very diverse, and each region has its own specialties, some certain vocabulary, and if we include all these vocabularies together, probably it will be much bigger. I don't know how big, what will be the number. And for the English language, the biggest dictionary for now is Oxford English Dictionary, and it has 600,000 words. But again, 600,000 words with some elements of periodic system, of chemical elements, and with some abbreviations. They even have this symbol of email @ to explain, and if we can consider the symbol @ as a separate word, we don't know. But again, English linguists claim that there should be 1 million. And as for the Russian languages, the big academic dictionary of the Russian language, it encounters 150,000 words. And the most famous and probably biggest and the first dictionary you're thinking of when we are talking about the Russian language, it is the Dal dictionary. By the way, Dal was born in Ukraine, in Lugansk Oblast, but he was passionate about the Russian language and he was collecting this Russian vocabulary. He did just such a great job, and he also was a medic who spent the certain time near the dying Pushkin when he was injured during the. Not many people, even in the Russian-speaking environment, know that. But this Vladimir Dal, who was born in Ukraine, who was a Ukrainian doctor, he collected 200,000 words of the Russian language. Can you imagine? So this is, for now, as to my knowledge, it's the biggest dictionary. But again, Russian linguists claim that they managed to collect 400,000 words, and they're going to publish their book soon. So that's the whole numbers of the whole language, and estimated, so somewhere between 150,000 and 600,000 words totally we can find in one language. Do you think you know that many? I'm sure I don't. That means that we should look at something more comprehensive and something we can refer to, and there are people who professionally deal with the language, with the words, vocabulary, and whose job is to develop their vocabulary and to do it in the most sophisticated way. I'm talking about the writers, and first of all about the writers of the classic literature. And here I didn't include the Ukrainian writers because it's not that many data available, and there were some quantitative researchers, of course, but it is quite hard to tell you who knew how many words in Ukrainian language. That means that we'll jump to this comparison between Russian and English, and spoiling the conclusion, it will be approximately the same. So my conclusion actually, after researching this topic, that certain language, like big language, it has more or less the same amount of vocabulary, and the classic authors, they use more or less the same amount of words when they write the, or when they wrote the works, the big literature masterpieces. So, as for the hugest and probably the most famous English not writer but poet, William Shakespeare, his language is estimated something between 30,000 words and 35,000 words. But if we talk about poets in general, when we compare poets and prose writers, poets usually tend to use less vocabulary than prose writers. Probably it's because of the rhyming, but it is very consistent in English and Russian literature, which I compared. So the biggest vocabulary among poets for English language, it is William Shakespeare with up to 35,000 words. And the largest vocabulary among prose writers is Dickens, and his vocabulary of common English is somewhere about 45,000 words, but he also used a lot of vocabulary which can be considered as neologism or the vocabulary which he used only once in his works throughout the work. So his full vocabulary is estimated as 60,000 words. So we can tell that Charles Dickens knew 60,000 words, and William Shakespeare knew at least 35,000. That's for English literature. When we are talking about the Russian classic literature, the situation is less sure because there are, I guess, fewer trustable researchers, and the numbers are ranging in the huge amount without any explanation. So the biggest explanation is that it depends how to count, but here it's not an excuse. So something is wrong with the calculation here, but it's not contradictory results. So I'll tell you the lowest number and I'll tell you the highest number towards a certain person, and it probably will be somewhere in between. We need to wait more to get to the real researchers probably here. So among poets, you will be surprised because the most vocabulary you can meet not in the poetry of Alexander Pushkin, who is the most classic and whose name will come to you first when you think about the Russian poetry. But Pushkin approximately used 23,000 words. And this number is quite persistent, and probably it should be like this because he's very well researched. His poetry is very well researched. But there is another Russian poet, classic poet, Mikhail Lermontov, and his vocabulary is estimated something between 15, not that many, even less than Pushkin, and 40,000. So if it's 40,000 really, he will use more vocabulary than William Shakespeare, for example, but it might be as less than 15. So on the first place, it will be something between, but more or less the same for poetry. And the absolute record for the prose, you wouldn't be surprised here, and I wasn't surprised here, of course, is Lev Tolstoy, and his vocabulary was somewhere between 40 and 70,000. And if you're wondering, Dostoevsky's vocabulary was also not that small. It was something between 35 and 43,000, with 5,255 unique words, according to this dictionary that was created for him, personally for him. So this is the classics vocabulary. And again, normal people, probably they would understand this vocabulary. I read Dostoevsky, I read Tolstoy, I read Pushkin, obviously, myself. I have troubles reading Dickens and Shakespeare in English, so probably my English vocabulary is not that good, in original, like it was written. But I also read some articles that when we read Pushkin, for example, we nowadays perceive it not as we should do it, and we are getting the wrong message, because the words there actually now mean something different. That is also probably true, so we still need preparation in order to read this classic literature, and often we need some kind of explanations. We have it on the bottom of the book or on the end of the book. And now we should go to the normal people. So how many words the usual person like me or probably you will know and use in the native language? Again, a lot depends on the counting, and there are some researchers that say that 90% of our vocabulary is centered around up to 400 words. So in everyday situations like, oh, I'm going to drive my car at work, or I'm going to the supermarket, we are using this vocabulary: drive, go, supermarket, food, eat, drink, and that everything will contain about 400 words, and if you know 400 words, you wouldn't get lost in the foreign country, which is probably A2 level of the language if we compare. Yes, so it's about 400 words. But among the most frequent words in any vocabulary, and these researchers, they also prove that in classic literature also the most words, the most vocabulary you can meet, if you wouldn't count the very single one words that appear once in 1,000 pages, there are around 6,000 of the most frequent words. So our everyday situations can be covered with the number of words between 300, 400 and 6,000, and also this is very consistent with the information I learned about the Chinese language, which I'm trying to study now, that in order to read a normal newspaper you need to know about 5,000 characters. So 5,000-6,000 words is something that the majority of native speakers would use every day. But is that a language proficiency? What is language proficiency? Here I can share my personal experience because I cannot really count my vocabulary. Again, I tried different apps online and I don't trust them. I don't think that the results are something that I can really be certain of. But right now I'm also working part-time for Link, and there you have the possibility to count the words you're using, and because I'm creating the content in Russian and Ukrainian as in my native languages, I'm able to see how many words I'm using for creating this content. And both in Russian and Ukrainian, after 2 months of doing it, of placing some content there, I hit the point of 10,500 words in each language because I'm creating the similar content. So I need to point that it's not my vocabulary, the full my vocabulary, and right now I'm creating the content for beginners and intermediate students, not higher than the level intermediate one. So if I'm creating the content for the up to intermediate 1 level, I hit the point of 10,500 words. And there are also other creators for the platform, and I tried to compare my results to their results. And the person who is longer of everybody there and who creates content for many years for different levels and in different ways, so this person has the mark of 70,000 words on Link on this app, which really counts the vocabulary, the unique vocabulary is a new algorithm that can allow us to count it that way. So my up to intermediate 1 level is 10,500. The level of several years creating the wide range of vocabulary, including the advanced vocabulary, C2 vocabulary, is 70,000. And I also compared it to a language learner who are on the platform probably for 5 or 6 years, and he hit 20,000. So that's approximately how the situation is among the native speakers and among the learners who can count their vocabulary. That's my message. So probably the native speaker in at least Slavic languages as Ukrainian, as Russian, would definitely know something up to 50,000 words to a certain degree. Yes, and That sounds like a huge and obviously it's acquired throughout the time, and when people are comparing the Tolstoy and for example Pushkin, they were saying that actually Tolstoy lived longer. So literally we're acquiring it gradually throughout our life, especially if we are reading a lot, and it doesn't mean that I use them in my everyday life. Probably my everyday life situations are covered with the vocabulary of 3,000. And 10,000 is actually like from fairy tales, from this small vocabulary. So up to intermediate one level, it will be covered with maybe 11,000 words. Let me know if you found this information impressive or curious or funny. Do you know how many words are in your language, if it's not English, because English we covered here? And have you ever tried to estimate how many words do you know in your native or target language? And do you believe this research? That's my message for today. That's the story. Thank you very much for watching. And special thanks to my patrons and patrons. That's because of you I can create more such videos. And if you're not there, please consider supporting me. And if you can't right now, don't forget about your likes. Leave a comment, and that will definitely help. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to meet you very soon in our next episodes. Goodbye for now.